I've been working at the intersection of autism and business communication for the past decade and have found some additional opportunities, I believe, for higher education and the workforce in general. In my classes of human communication, I have found recently that it seems the rosters have been changing a bit. I meet more and more students who I suspect live somewhere on the autism spectrum. And these students stand out to me because, you see, they're some of my favorite students. They were and are such favorites of mine because they remind me of my family. So, this is, I guess, what I looked like whenever I first began working on the autism spectrum with my kids. I initially had 2 children that I thought were completely normal, but others thought they were a bit of an odd duck. And I thought, well, you just don't know my kids the way I do. And then we went to elementary school. And in elementary school, they said, autism. And they said, it's permanent. And I wasn't really sure how that was going to go because it appeared that my kids were now on a different life path than I had originally intended, that I originally thought. And that life path turned, and it was a little fuzzy out there. And so, being the ever tenacious researcher, okay, other people call it stubborn, take it what you will, I decided to take my abilities with pretending I can do construction and build a scaffold to another path. I think this is probably what I look like as I tried to help my family on this journey. So I was on the scaffolding while building scaffolding. And y'all, I don't know how to build scaffold. You may not notice, but I have on no hard hat. And the reason why is because I had no idea how far we would need to go. And the really odd part is I have on no shoes in this picture, but I think it's very telling because, quite honestly, when you're a mom and they say, hey, guess what? Your kid's on a different path. You go just like you are and you run with it. And so that's what I've done. So this has led me to not just trying to figure out how to do better on the autism spectrum, but also to helping those in my community understand that spectrum folks have an amazing amount of talent that we have to offer that's not yet fully recognized. Now, you may recognize these numbers from the CDC. They're very popular. They make the news. It says, hey, guess what? From a nice long study in 2014, we now have 1 in 59 students who at the time were 3rd graders being identified as being on the spectrum. Folks, these kids are now in 7th grade. We have 5 years before they walk the stage and cross into adulthood, and we're not quite ready. But you can be. So here's what I need to talk about. What is autism spectrum disorder? Okay, seriously, we got to stop because look, I teach communication and I teach that words matter. And when you tell me disorder, I immediately remember that disorder is an anomaly and disorder is a negative life prognosis. And if we're going to call this autism spectrum disorder, then I have to look at my students as disordered and my children as disordered. In fact, I'll just let you know, I guess I'm disordered as well because I also land on the spectrum. So would you humor me for just a minute? I'd like to go with autism spectrum differences. I'll let them keep the initials, but I'm changing the name. So at its core, autism spectrum is simply a difference in how communication occurs. If you're a neurotypical person, you would say somebody on spectrum does not communicate the normal way. It's normal to them. And that's where the problem lies. You may remember somebody that you know on the autism spectrum. Maybe they have an intensity of focus, and I will admit, sometimes to the exclusion of other things. For me, I really love research. But also, it's important to note that there's some really neat work out there in studies. There's one study that shows a genetic marker that links high IQs and autism. In a study of 500,000 folks in England, they were absolutely able to correlate an interest in science, technology, engineering, and math, perhaps you've heard of this, the STEM fields, with autism traits. What does this mean for us? And more importantly, you're here, what does it mean for you? Let's talk a little bit about ASD. You may have heard it's a spectrum. That's right. Each one of you is different. You're on humanity's spectrum. I like the wonderful phrasing that says, you know, if you've met one kid with autism, you've met one kid with autism. So the next time somebody says, oh yeah, that kid, he's autistic. Like, first of all, he's a kid. Don't call him autistic, but that's okay. That's a different story. If you want to believe everything about this particular human being true for everyone else on the spectrum, then you might as well go out there and find your all-red rainbow. Someone is messing with you. It's just not true. So I wanted to think about the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Don't you all? So the Bureau of Labor Statistics is trying to frighten us. They're really trying to get the scare into us by telling us, hey, guess what, America? We need 1 million more STEM professionals in the next 10 years than we are currently slated to produce. Not 1 million, 1 million more. And that's only if America intends to stay at the top of the economic game. Do we intend to stay at the top of it? If so, we've got to find 1 million more STEM professionals. Guess what? I have this idea. I have an idea where I might be able to find 500,000 people on the spectrum who are perfect for STEM. Because you remember those numbers back there of 1 in 59? That is 60,000 students conservatively. So in the 10 years since that study happened, we've had 500,000 kids walk the stage. So if the Bureau of Labor Statistics can help us with their numbers, knowing that we need 1 million STEM professionals, and I can find you 1 million STEM professionals, or at least 500,000, then perhaps this is something we need to look into. And what are your roles? I will share with you that I've talked about this subject on multiple occasions. I've shared with faculty, with staff, with members of the community, and after every single time, I get a couple questions. I can almost count on them. I almost want people to just raise their hand and go like, I'd like to ask question A, I'd like to ask question B. Okay, here we go. Question A is this. I have a friend, relative, cousin, pick one, on the autism spectrum, and I want to know what to do next. I've got some thoughts. And the other question, which you may be asking, is why haven't we heard about this before? I don't really know. I can hypothesize. It's what I do. I like to take guesses. But here's my reality. Do you remember that chart from the CDC? And it was going up and up? That's a pace of change that is very dramatic. Every 2 years, we're jumping up numbers exponentially. And when you ask large institutions like a public school, a college, a university, or even the HR department at your local business organization, it's pretty hard to turn those around and change corporate culture and business practices and school norms as quickly as the autism diagnosis rates are happening. So that may be it. The diagnosis rates are going up, and we're kind of slow in how far we can go. So, the first time that I really heard autism, I have to take you back. It was in elementary school when they said, no, your kid really is an odd duck. Okay. But you know what I was thankful for? The federal government. No? Okay. So the federal government has a really great system of laws, and it says, hey, politician, you had better do right by these kids. You've got to invest in teacher trainings and dedicated programs and money, and did I mention money? And you have to develop programs so that these students can experience education the same way that their peers do. And so I think students possibly feel like they go through elementary and middle school and high school with a nice warm blanket of support, and it marches them all the way across graduation. And then public school says, bye, see you later. And then what? I think we have to go back to the numbers. Because the truth is that 2 years after high school graduation, students on spectrum enroll in colleges or workforce at about 18%. something's not right. So for 2 years, that something is actually nothing going on. No trade school, no college, no university, no paid employment. This model is simply not sustainable if, as you remember, we have 1 million jobs we need to fill. We can't fill 1 million jobs if we're letting 500,000 students stay at home. But that's okay. I have some solutions for you. One of the solutions is that I would ask you to I would like you to help shift perspective. And let's reduce our definition of odd and expand our definition of normal to actually take advantage of these oddities that students on spectrum may be exhibiting. It's when we do this that the amazing power of the autism brain may become economically necessary. So, if we can change our focus, we have to look at education. It's education that must change initially, because the great jobs that are out there first require credentials. And our public schools are doing a fine job up until we get to higher education. Higher education, whether private or public, is a big shift in reality. Even for the neurotypical students, the graduation rates are not where we need them to be to stay a competitive country. So most definitely, for those on spectrum, the shift to higher education can prove very difficult, and it produces quite a bit of anxiety. The college experiences, I think, go from the warm blanket to possibly a kick in the head. And the reason this happens is because the federal laws change. So in K through 12, we ask schools to do whatever they can to make sure that the students have an equitable education. But in college and on the workplace, they are simply tasked with, don't make it harder. So we go from a positive model to just don't be negative model. It's not working, and we're missing out. So preliminary data from my research suggests that college students want friends. I know, hard to believe, 18-year-olds, they want a friend. And they want a great college experience, and they want to go to school, but they also know that there is a difference in the way that they process information. So they are stating in the studies that they want teachers who understand their academic abilities, but also some of the quirks and their unique needs. And then they really want friendship. They want the friends that will sustain them on their path from childhood to adolescence all the way through adulthood. And I recall sometimes during my really tough courses, it was my friends that kept me coming to class. But are not algebra. So our college experiences might not be what they need to be. And one of the reasons that could happen would be that in the fast-paced world of college scheduling, I think even a neurotypical student would have a hard time finding that good buddy in the 10-minute time that you have to race across campus. So there's the rub. What do? We know that education has to change so that we can get the credentials to the students, and we know the students are excited to be here, but something's not working. So I can tell you this is a picture of your local bagger at your local store. And a lot of studies that I read speak of people who did make it all the way through college, even with an advanced degree, yet aren't getting the jobs and are now a bagger at the local supermarket with a master's degree in computer programming and having a hard time holding on to that job. And the reason that happens is that we don't have a better understanding of how to alter our workplaces so that they meet the skill sets that people on spectrum have. I also want you to think about the complete waste of opportunity that happened for somebody with a master's degree in computer programming and how they must feel knowing that this is the job they have, and then they lose that job. So where can businesses work on this? First of all, may I recommend that sometimes students on spectrum aren't all that great at interviews. And I'm sorry to talk about one of my kids, and he's going to be very upset with me, but I'll tell you this. He does not enjoy eye contact. That's a pretty nice way to say it. And some of you may think his voice is rather flat. I don't see it, but I've been told. But now imagine if you were the interviewer and you had somebody who did not engage you in eye contact and whose voice didn't have the melody that we expect. Don't you think the interviewer, without any training, would assume disinterest or possibly even deceit? And that person isn't called back for the second interview. And thus, opportunity and talent are wasted yet again. In the coming years, as artificial intelligence envelops us, takes over our lives, you pick, I can assure you that we will need coders who pick up on something that people on the spectrum really are well known for, having an intensity of focus to the distraction of everything else. I want a coder who will completely obsess about the program and the problems that those programs seek to solve. That's what I want. I frequently like to explain autism as an app on your phone. Yes, it can be a bit okay if it's a bit buggy at times. Because the truth is, the bonus features you get with this app, they are not available anywhere else. And so it's worth putting up with some of the buggy features. So, our buggy problem is not a buggy problem at places like Johnson & Johnson, SAP, Apple, Microsoft, and I have to tell you about a new company, Exceptional Minds. I will also tell you about somebody who works at one of these forward-thinking companies named Angela Adams. And she thought she shouldn't go to college because it wasn't a pleasant experience until she took a math class. And one college professor saw her genius, pulled her aside, and explained to her all the hidden rules of the college world. And as a result now, she is the data integrity manager at Johnson & Johnson. The beautiful part is those types of jobs require intellect and logic and extreme attention to detail and knowledge of patterns and not a lot of communication with other people. What a perfect fit. I also recommend IRS auditor. But, or maybe not. I don't want the IRS to know that because, okay. I also want to talk to you about a movie you may have seen, little film, Black Panther. Right. So it achieved Academy Award success and a lot of box office success. And Exceptional Minds is a company that hires pretty much exclusively people on spectrum as part of their video editing graphics team because they found that folks that have this intensity of focus and would like to do the same behavior over and over again until it's perfect is a wonderful match for video editing in Hollywood. So here's where we have to figure out what we need to do. I need to push the envelope in helping people at higher education and in the workplace find the invisible workforce that has been there all along. There's a little bit of work left to do. I'll talk with you about the scaffolding that we must put in place. It's not a lot of scaffolding, but it will require a few tweaks to our own understanding. It will require some tweaks to possibly some handbooks, to the way lessons are administered and the way mastery of said lessons is accepted. But the options for winning are outrageous. And I truly believe that once the business world begins to understand the value of the spectrum brain power, employability at high rates will soon follow. So, I leave you by asking a lot. I understand. I'm asking for a shift in your own perspective. I'm asking for activism. I didn't say that the job was easy. In fact, the construction of the job may be difficult, and you may not know how to get there. But it's a job worth doing. Here's my hard hat. I'm ready to put it on. It's not going to be simple, but we need to get it done. Let's get to work.